You seem different. Like I was in a different place. Yeah, I heard the north side is just depends what you're in. Yeah, I'm not into party.
No, those things up there.
Sorry, I don't know where else the folks are. My student wrangling talents are not very well developed.
So it does show.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm still not.
Should I ring the bell outside and see if that would summon a few?
It's all right. Up to you.
I don't know.
No, they were there, they will come.
Well, they will come. Of course, we'll win.
Okay. Shall I start again? So let's start again with just spending a little time regenerating our motivation for the course. So just reflect briefly again why you're here, what you want to achieve for yourself or other sentient beings. So the highest motivation generally is, and the motivation expressed again and again in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras is to seeing that others are the same as oneself and wanting to have happiness, wanting to be free from suffering, and that all of one's own well-being and happiness comes about in dependence upon other sentient beings, then using one's life to benefit others as much as possible, and then recognizing that the best way to benefit others is to eliminate all faults and develop all positive qualities according to one's own potential, and thereby achieve a state of full enlightenment, and then from within that can continually work for the welfare of other sentient beings. So according to one's own understanding and belief, then it's good to generate a motivation to whatever happens in the session, that whatever happens in the session may be of the greatest possible benefit to all sentient beings and to myself as well, and my ability to benefit others. Okay, so last session at the end, we were just talking about a bit about how, because we were looking at a lot at whether there's a permanent self or not, or whether everything that constitutes us as a person is impermanent and changing moment to moment. But that the importance, the reason that's significant is that because the Buddha's main interest was the whole point of the Shakyamuni Buddha becoming enlightened and then turning the wheel of Dharma 2,600 years ago, was because sentient beings suffer. We experience suffering. The fundamental cause of sufferings of birth and old age, sickness, and death. And that death being separated from those we love again and again. But even during one lifetime, experiencing different sickness, weariness, anger, frustration, depression, sadness. Disappointment again and again. And so as Prince Siddhartha, his question was, well, why do we suffer? And is whatever we do, is it inevitable that we'll experience suffering again and again from life to life? Or is it possible to be free from suffering like fundamentally, such that we never have to experience again? So I guess there was this idea in ancient India, nirvana, that it's possible to achieve a state of being whereby you never take rebirth, you never have to experience rebirth and then old age, sickness, and death again, and you can abide in a state of lasting kind of well-being and happiness. So Prince Siddhartha set out from the kingdom to see if that that was true, if that was actually possible or not. So then once he did achieve enlightenment, then all of his he found that it is possible to fundamentally eliminate suffering, because all suffering arises from a fundamental ignorance, misunderstanding, which is a grasping at an exaggerated sense of self. And so once that's eliminated, then one doesn't have the other afflictive emotions, anger and arrogant pride, greed, lust, desire, jealousy, and so forth. And then one's karma doesn't ripen anymore, because for karma to ripen, it needs to be moistened by the afflictive emotions. So then, and all of the afflictive emotions and karma, they all arise from this fundamental grasping at an exaggerated sense of self. That's a reified or solid, a concrete sense of self that's not reality, right? So then once Buddha eliminated, through meditation on analyzing what is it that exists, how do I exist, recognizing that there is no permanent self, there's no autonomous substantial existent self, there's no self existing from its own side, and then deeply habituating the mind to that understanding of the truth, the ultimate nature of phenomena, then he eliminated all this tendency to grasp at a self, and now thereby generate selfish concern, and thereby generate attachment to them, some things that appear as pleasing, appealing to us, and aversion, hatred, or disgust towards other things that appeal as unpleasing to oneself, and then all the other afflictive emotions. So then, when the Buddha saw that it's possible to be completely free from that kind of ignorance and all the destructive emotions that it gives rise to, then when he taught the Dharma, the whole purpose of teaching all of the Dharma that the Buddha taught was for eliminating that grasping, that ignorance grasping at an exaggerated sense of self. So that's what the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are all about, analyzing how things exist. What is the nature of reality? And especially within things that exist, ourself as a person, how do we exist? How do I exist? But within the Buddha's teachings, so the Buddha didn't teach the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras right at the beginning, right? He first taught. So you can divide up the Buddha's teachings into. Maybe we'll come back to meditate a bit more later, but you could divide up the Buddha's teachings into three groups called the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So that's what we'll talk a bit about today, and how those are related, and how the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras fit within those, and then how those kind of provide like sort of a map for how to practice as someone practicing the Buddhist path. So there's these three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So what does that mean? I mean, a turning of the wheel of Dharma. Like, why use that term? You might have seen on like in Indian currency, there's much of the Indian currency, there's a Dharma called a Dharma chakra, a Dharma wheel. it's one of the symbols that King Ashoka used, together with a lion. But the Dharma, and then most of the monasteries, like I don't know, around Nepal, you see many of the monasteries will have a Dharma wheel above the main gate or above the main temple with 2 deer on either side. It's one of the most famous symbols of the Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings. So, the wheel of Dharma means basically that it's basically like the Buddha realized this truth of the way things exist, and then by explaining it to others, awakened others' minds, awakened others to that reality, and then they by explaining, then they also come to realize that and see how beneficial it is, and then they teach to others. So in that way, this wisdom, understanding the truth, it rolls like a wheel from generation to generation, awakening people, from generation, just like a wheel rolls from one place to another. And in ancient times, there were even called war wheels, like the wheels of a chariot. They'd have metal studs on the end to harm people, as the horses or something pull a chariot through a battlefield. Then it would destroy your enemies, like that. So, but here in terms of the wheel of Dharma, the enemies are disturbing attitudes, our own hatred, our own bigotry, our own arrogant pride, jealousy, and so forth. All the afflictive emotions that arise in our continuum and disturb the peace of the mind, and then lead us into actions of body, speech, or even thoughts that are harmful to others. So the wheel of Dharma is like you see the wheel of Dharma, it has like studs on the end, but it's this kind of understanding of the truth that one person realizes, and then it teaches to another, and then they teach to another, and they teach to another, and so it spreads that understanding, that wisdom, understanding reality, understanding truth. It spreads out and moves through time and destroys afflictive emotions, which are the causes of suffering, and thereby brings peace. So this is kind of so when Shakyamuni Buddha, after he achieved enlightenment, then the first teaching he gave was in Sarnath, outside Varanasi, Deer Park. And he gave that teaching to these, I believe it was 5, yeah. Kordenga, the Kordenga. So these 5 kind of spiritual friends who've been meditating with him on the banks of the Niranjana for like 6 years, during the 6 years of his austerities. So after he achieved enlightenment, then he looked to see who would be the most suitable receptacle to explain what he'd realized, and he saw that they would be the most suitable. So then he went to where they were in Deer Park and then taught them. And so that first teaching is called, and all of the teachings that fall in that class of teaching are called the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Right, so that first teaching in Sarnath is called the first teaching of the wheel, first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So in that case, the Dharma kind of means like the truth of what the Buddha realized, and the speech that embodies that truth. Generally, Dharma has different meanings. It can also just mean an existent phenomena. But so the Buddha taught. So that's the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, just 2 months after the Buddha was enlightened. And the main teaching of that first teaching is on the Four Noble Truths, right? The truth of suffering, truth of the origin of suffering, truth of the cessation, and the truth of the path. And that's so the whole, and then through the rest of his life, then there's a class of teachings that belong to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which are all sutras that primarily teach the Four Noble Truths, or topics kind of directly related to the Four Noble Truths. Well, that's a bit of a misnomer, because all of the Buddhist teachings are contained within the Four Noble Truths. So usually His Holiness will say that it seems like the reason the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths first is because that's the overarching framework for all of the teachings that he would give for the next 40 years, right? But in that very first teaching, we can see that, what does the Buddha teach first? That, the truth of suffering, that all compounded phenomena are in the nature of suffering. So there's these four four seals that sort of reflect that, where it says what? All impermanent, all compounded phenomena are impermanent, all contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering, all phenomena are empty and selfless, and freedom from nirvana is peace. It's called the four seals, that any Buddhist teaching or any Buddhist philosophical school will accept these four assertions, that all the compounded phenomena, means all phenomena arising from causes and conditions, are impermanent, they're continually changing. And then all phenomena that are produced by karma and afflictive emotions are in the nature of suffering. And then everything that exists whatsoever is empty and selfless. It means doesn't exist from its own side, or is a dependent, interdependently arising phenomena. And then freedom from samsara. Samsara being, the process by which we create karma, and then the afflictive emotions ripen the karma, and then throws us into rebirth, kind of uncontrollably, again and again and again. So freedom from that is a state of peace. So in this first teaching that Shakyamuni Buddha gave to the 5 fortunate disciples in Sarnath, then he taught this the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are, it's like the rationale for teaching in that order. That first, that samsara is in the nature of suffering, and then the cause of suffering is within our own mind. It's not like bad weather, or not because we don't have enough money, or not because we don't have friends. It's not because other people treat us in a certain way that we suffer. That fundamentally suffering doesn't come from outside. So no matter how much we manipulate our external environment, or try to control other people, or accumulate possessions, accumulate power, wealth, or fame, that those things in and of themselves will not bring lasting satisfaction. That fundamentally, happiness, suffering is an experience of the mind, and happiness is an experience of the mind. And so fundamentally the source of our suffering and happiness, the sources of both of those, is within our own mind. And so the most direct way, and the only way to achieve lasting happiness, is by controlling, subduing, purifying our own mind, and developing our own positive qualities, right? Eliminating faults and developing positive qualities. So the analogy for that is like, but first, if we don't realize that we have discontentment, that we have dissatisfaction, that we have suffering experiences, then we don't do anything about them. So often we kind of drift from experience to experience in this life, because everything is just kind of good enough that we oftentimes people turn towards Dharma practice and religion in general, especially Buddhism, when we have like a crisis in life, when we're rejected by a partner, or we lose someone close to us, or someone passes, someone close to us dies, or we ourselves become very ill, or have a near-death experience and almost die, or when we have some kind of, or have depression, or some other tragic experience kind of shakes us out of our ordinary way of kind of going about things, and causes us to question more deeply, like, what is life, my life? What's the meaning of life? What am I supposed to be doing with this life? So those kind of questions lead us into Dharma, but it's kind of related to the reason the Buddha taught the truth of suffering first, was to help us not be distracted by attachment to the pleasures of this life, and see how fundamentally, even most of the things that we, most of the ways we chase after to get pleasure, by like having good food, going to nice places, wearing nice clothes, being with, attractive people, doing things to win approval from others, doing things to be more renowned or influential. That most of those things, they're not stable basis of inner satisfaction and well-being and long-term happiness, especially when you think about the fact of death, and that death will happen, and what's going to happen after that. So the analogy for understanding like the reason the Buddha taught the truth of suffering first is like that of a sick person. when we have an illness, we can have it, some illnesses we can have for a long time and it doesn't really, strong symptoms don't manifest and we don't notice it. It doesn't become a big problem until it's like too late. Sometimes cancer is like that, some kinds of cancer. So the reason the Buddha taught the truth of suffering first is it's just like, if we have an illness, before we're going to do anything about it, we have to realize that it's a problem first. And then once we realize, it's a problem, then we check to see, well, is there some way to be free from the illness or not? So the Buddha taught the truth of suffering to awaken us or make us more aware of, that no matter what enjoyments you have in life, they're not going to last long. Eventually, we're all aging, going to become old, and you're going to inevitably become sick. Whatever kind of good health you have, it won't last forever. And eventually we're going to die and be separated. And then what's going to happen? We'll be separated from this body, from this, friends and family, from all of our possessions, from this very, identity that we have built upon, this body and all the appearances of this life. So then, if we haven't prepared for that at all, that can be extremely traumatic experience. And through the force of karma, then we'll be thrown into rebirth again. And then again, as, if we're fortunate enough to be born as a human being, as a young child, being totally confused about what's going on and what's going on in life. So the Buddha taught the truth of suffering as way of awakening us to this kind of dissatisfactory condition in which we find ourselves. The main characteristic of that being, under that our experiences and so much of our emotions are under the control of habituation and karma. But then the second thing he taught was the truth of the origins of suffering. So that explaining that all of the dissatisfaction of this life, mostly it comes through suffering experiences come about through the force of karma. But that karma is produced by different afflictive emotions, the fundamental three being attachment, anger, and then those two both arising from a selfish, self-centered attitude, which is based upon this grasping at the sense of a concrete, solid, independent self, which is a complete misnomer, is a complete misapprehension of how we exist. So therefore, because all of our suffering, dissatisfying experiences arise from a fundamental ignorance, then it's possible to, when we understand the truth, to eliminate that ignorance. And then it's kind of like pulling one card out from the bottom of a house of cards, like the whole thing just collapses. And then we can be completely free from samsara that way. So then, but then the question is, well, is that kind of cessation really possible? So the third thing the Buddha taught is the truth of cessation. So the reason the Buddha taught the truth of cessation third is just saying that in order to explain that because all of suffering arises from this fundamental ignorance, then if you eliminate that ignorance with wisdom, then it's possible to cease all of the afflictive emotions and then the resultant karma, and then all the suffering experiences, the dissatisfying experiences that arise from karma. And then that's all replaced by wisdom, right? So like I was saying earlier, like a kind of wisdom of selflessness, that there's no permanent self, there's no self existing from its own side, there's no inherently existent self. So there's no kind of self that exists disconnected from and independent from, everything else in the world, but rather there's countless causes and conditions that come together to produce this body and this mind. And then upon that we have the sense of I. But actually a more wise sense of I is a sense of self, recognizing that whole kind of infinite process of cause and effect, which has given rise to each moment of this life, and recognizing how each moment of this life, each moment of experience is just part of this whole kind of collection of phenomena upon which we label I. So the actual more realistic, wise sense of self is one that's inextricably, intimately interrelated with with the environment, with even water, air, earth, the planet, the solar system, other sentient beings, and the whole history of all things, really. So when we replace this ignorance with wisdom, then because that wisdom, like I was explaining earlier, is grounded in a correct understanding of reality, then it's unshakable and irreversible. It's something that we can continually abide in, henceforth, forever. Once we, develop that wisdom to a deep level and totally eliminate the tendency to grasp at this false self again. So therefore, a complete cessation of suffering is possible, both because its fundamental cause is unstable, because it's a wrong kind of mind, and because its antidote is the wisdom is completely grounded in reality, therefore extremely stable. But then the question becomes, well, how do we actually go about actualizing that potential to be free from suffering? So then is the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path. So when the Buddha gave this first turning of the wheel of Dharma, this first Dharma teaching in Sarnath, then, and this is, so we think about because there's this whole group of teachings, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So, and that's what essentially is the Pali Canon, right? So if you've ever read any sutras in the Pali Canon, they all belong to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So, so they're characterized by emphasizing the Four Noble Truths, although the Four Noble Truths are taught in all of the other, they're indirectly or directly taught in, all of the Buddhist teachings fit within the Four Noble Truths. So, so that alone is not a characteristic. It's not a kind of, doesn't set the first turning of the wheel of Dharma off from all the others. But other things that are emphasized, just to kind of give you a sense, is the Eightfold Noble Path, right? So if you study Buddhism in like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, then that's a very prominent kind of thing being taught, Eightfold Noble Path. And placement meditation is taught, Anapanasati, watching the breath. And then a very strong emphasis on morality, on abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? Abandoning, of course, all of the Buddhist teachings explain that, but there's a special emphasis in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, the morality of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, and the Pratimoksha vows. The Pratimoksha vows are the vows of individual liberation. So when we take refuge, like the 5 lay vows to abandon killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, adultery, and intoxicants, then for the 5 lay vows or the Getzel vows or the vows of a novice monk or vows of a fully ordained monk, those are all called the vows of individual liberation. And the reason is that, and the Buddha taught those all in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Like all the Vinaya Sutras are part of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So the reason that the Buddha emphasized, like those pratimoksha vows of individual liberation in the first, is because the main intended audience for the first turning of the wheel of Dharma are those they're not seeking full enlightenment, but rather they're seeking just mere liberation from suffering. They want to be free from suffering for themselves, right? So the main kind of outlook is recognizing that I have suffering, and if I don't practice Dharma, then even when I die away from this life, that's not an end to existence. That I'll take rebirth, and again I'll suffer in that life, and then again and again without end. So therefore, I want to be free from this whole process of taking rebirth through the force of karma and delusion as quick as possible. And so the focus is primarily on one's own suffering and being free from suffering oneself. Of course, there is, the Buddha did teach the 4 immeasurables: immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, immeasurable equanimity. So it did teach meditation on metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion, in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, but he didn't really teach this kind of bodhisattva attitude, this attitude that, actually the welfare of others, others are countless in number. I'm only one. And each of us has the same, is the same in having the wish to have happiness and be free from suffering. And my happiness all comes about from others. So therefore I should use my life to serve others, completely dedicate my life to the welfare of others and do whatever I can to accomplish the welfare and the aims of others. That kind of selfless, extreme altruistic bodhisattva ideal, the Buddha didn't teach in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Why? Because the audience to which he taught were not suitable receptacles for that. It's not something that would appeal to them. It's not something that they felt like, that they would feel like they can kind of take on that responsibility to use their life to benefit others. I mean, I don't know, you have to, sometimes it's kind of hard to imagine, like, who are all these people who are so selfless that they don't care that much about others? But you can see, sometimes, think of the different people you've met, the different people that you come across in your life. You can see some people, they just don't, it's like if you tell them about the bodhisattva ideal, they're just not interested in that. You can see people have different dispositions, such that for some people, you tell them about, when you die, it's very possible through your karma, you could take rebirth as an animal or hell or something, and that really kind of shakes them up. That really compels them. But you tell them about, you have the potential to achieve full enlightenment, and it's just totally beyond anything they could kind of imagine, even, and so it doesn't touch them, right? So the main, in short, the two main characteristics of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma are that it was taught to groups of people who for whom the bodhisattva ideal is just too vast, and so they're much more comfortable with kind of engaging in spiritual practice in order to be free from suffering of this life and the suffering of future lives and the suffering of samsara, right? And that's it, primarily for oneself. It doesn't mean they don't have compassion or loving kindness or recognize the error in harming others. It doesn't mean they don't care about others, but rather like this kind of like extreme selfless commitment to work for the welfare of all sentient beings is something that's just too vast for them. Yeah. Did you raise your hand?
No, I was just wondering, so what's the name of that group of people?
Well, yeah. So, yeah, thank you. No. This would be, in the Lam Rim, the first scope in the Lam Rim. So it'd be the beings of small and medium capacity. Like in some of you have heard about Lam Rim, I'm sure, but it's this way of presenting all of the Buddha's teachings as a graduated path of practice for one person. So it's divided up into 3 segments according to the scope of one's motivation, how vast or narrow one's motivation is. So the first two sections of the Lam Rim, the first is for beings whose primary concern is to make sure they get a good future rebirth, right? To achieve happiness in future lives. So those are called beings of small capacity, kibujung in Tibetan.
And Sanskrit? What's the Sanskrit?
The Sanskrit? I don't know, actually. Yeah. It wouldn't be so common because the way of dividing the Buddha's teachings according to motivation in those 3 groups was first begun by Atisha, right? So Atisha is one of the last Indian scholars. So it's not like a term that would have been commonly used before. Yeah?
So solitary realizers and hearers, they are in this lower scope.
I just talked about the lower scope. The lower scope or the scope. Lama Zopa Rinpoche never likes to use the term scope because it really doesn't fit the Tibetan. It's more like kibujung. Kibu means a person. Yeah, in Tibetan, the literal translation is like small person, medium person, great person, right? Which sounds kind of derogatory, right? You're a small person or you're a medium person. And it doesn't give you much meaning. But the kebu jung, like kebu means person and jung means small, right? So, but the small is not like their body size, right? And it's more like the scope of their aspiration, right? their motivation, like why are they practicing Buddhism? So for those who their aim is merely to achieve happiness in future lives, that's called like the smallest level of motivation, or the person who their capacity is just that and no greater, then they're called, that's actually translates whatever. So then the next rise to attachment, anger, selfish pride, jealousy, again and again and again. As long as I'm not free from those afflictive tendencies, then I create karma and then I take rebirth without end, and that's not satisfying in any way. No? So beings that they recognize that and then they want to be free from that whole process, the whole samsara, then they're beings of the medium capacity, or medium capable beings. So the hearers and solitary realizers are both that. They'd be of the, because they want to be free from samsara, right? Yeah, hearers and solitary realizers fit in that. So but hearers and solitary realizers and beings of the small capable beings, middle capable beings, they all follow primarily the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Right. So you look at the Pali Canon, right? Sutras in the Pali Canon. You can see there's mention of bodhisattvas a little bit here and there. Of course, the teacher is Shakyamuni Buddha, but there's not much explanation of how to achieve the state of a Buddha. It's more explanation about how to be free from samsara, how to be free from suffering of samsara. And the main way to do that is to stop creating negative karma, right? And then recognize the nature of the afflictive emotions and apply the antidotes to those, right? Including ignorance. So one characteristic of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma is that it's geared towards beings who either just want, happy future life, a happy rebirth in future lives, or want to be free from samsara and nothing beyond. And then the other characteristic is that it's kind of similarly, because the people who are in audience for those teachings, not only do they have kind of a limited motivation in terms of what they aim for in the future, but also kind of a similar limitation in terms of what their sense of reality is or could possibly be. So, and so in the first turning the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught that everything inherently exists. Everything is inherently existent. Everything has a kind of nature. So like this watch, it has a kind of watchness, which is, not just, so it's not just a watch because, it has these different parts and functions in a certain way to indicate what time of day it is. And then we have a concept watch and impute it on that base. So this being a watch, it doesn't depend upon, someone having a concept of watch. It's because it's from the side of the object. It has the characteristics such that it's suitable to be a watch, and thereby it's like from the side of the object, through the power of its own characteristics, it is a watch, right? Irregardless of what the concept of watch is. So, and as a person, then the Buddha taught, everything from form up to enlightenment, also beings. In the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, he taught that everything does have a sort of essential nature. It exists from its own side, right? And so these are the two main characteristics. So just try to remember this. The first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught for beings who, what is their aspiration? To have either happy rebirth in future lives or be free from samsara, right? And then what is the view of reality? Everything has an essential nature. All compounded phenomena are impermanent? Yes. All contaminated phenomena are in the nature of suffering? Yes. All phenomena are empty and selfless? Okay, yes. But in that case, what does it mean? It means they're empty of, you could say, one, like compounded phenomena are empty of being permanent. So there's no permanent self. But then even more subtle than that, they're empty of, you can say it like this, like the easiest way to think about it is in terms of the person. So in the first turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught that, the ordinary person we think of is just something imputed upon the body and mind. But there is this, the stream of mental consciousness which goes from life to life. That's a substantially existent self. So that is kind of that is the essence of what the person is, right? There is kind of an essential nature to the self. It's not permanent, so it's not like the Jains in that there's this permanent, unchanging person that goes from life to life. It's an impermanent flow of, kind of a phenomenon, this subtle mind or mental consciousness that goes from life to life. But that it's like that is the person. So when you search for the person, then you find that stream of consciousness, and that is the substantial existent person. So in the first turn of the wheel of Dharma, everything, there's an essence to the person, there's an essence to the watch, there's an essence to the mind. Everything does have, I guess the clearest phrase to use, which is, the best translation on the Tibetan, everything exists by force of its own characteristics. Like this flower has the characteristics of a carnation, and therefore it is a carnation from the side of the object, right? Everything exists by force of its own characteristics. So because the audience for that first turn of the wheel of Dharma, if you were to tell them nothing exists, from its own side, nothing, when you search for anything, you cannot find that thing, they would freak out. They would be like, are you kidding? They would fall into nihilism. They would feel like, oh, then that means I don't exist. That means nothing exists. That means I can just be a hedonist and just do whatever I want because nothing matters, because nothing actually exists, right? So he didn't teach that for those people, right? So then now the second turn of the wheel of Dharma. The second turn of the wheel of Dharma is mainly the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Yes.
Can I just add?
What's your name again?
Oh, my name's Isaac.
Isaac, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Isaac.
Yeah, just about that, the kind of ranking, the audience in terms of like their motivation and who has a better motivation and view. I think it's really interesting that the small vehicle is the small person would be like somebody who wants happiness in the next life, which I think even from the perspective of American culture is already a pretty vast aspiration that I think a lot of times people are concerned with just, I want happiness in the next moment, or I want happiness when my investment pays off in this life. Nothing to do at all with the next life.
Yeah.
So that's even beyond the scope of most people and I would just speak for American culture's scope of what would be possible for their life. And that view, as well as what you were saying, it's not on most people's minds. And so when I encounter these teachings and like you were saying, the vastness of the aspiration of the bodhisattva vow, for me it's like, well, like I want to think that I have that aspiration. I have aspirational bodhicitta, but like realistically, maybe I'm even below the level of the small person, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? So you're gonna go into all the other trainings, and I'm like, maybe I'm like barely on the first one here, right? And so,
Hello. We've got refreshments.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So I don't know. Is it meant to be a way to think about where you fit into this?
Yeah. Sushil, how should we do?
We can keep on chatting.
Okay, we can take a break and just maybe in a few minutes. You mean will they serve? They're going to serve to everyone, or they're just going to put on the side and then we'll take
They're going to do like
ourselves?
the compasser.
Oh yeah. Okay, great. Yeah.
Geshe first.
Sure. Yeah.
This is
Since
unexpected.
Geshe was slightly distracted, I'm just going to respond as an old Buddhist. I've been Buddhist for more than 40 years, and I obviously have taken bodhisattva vows and also tantric vows and so forth. So if you talk about
There
my
we go. Once everyone
intellectually
served, then we'll take a break.
constructed goal in life is to attain Buddhahood. But I would say that in realistic terms, in terms of my drives, on a very good day, I'm the person's small capacity.
Yeah.
On a
At
good
least.
day, and my best moments. In terms of the drive, in terms of the drive. Mostly it's worldly motivation, So it's a slow process of transforming one's intentions in life, Obviously someone who's a better practitioner, maybe it's a different story, but that would be my realistic story.
Maybe so they'll serve tea to each of you. So just when you receive your tea, just wait and then we'll offer it together. And then we'll enjoy together. But yeah, I think similar to what Vicky was saying. Yeah, we're not. It's like some moments we can have aspirational bodhicitta, and other moments we can be completely selfish. And then, but we're a person labeled upon all those. So yeah, but we hopefully we can become better and better and better. Right? That's as long as we're going in the right direction, that's what we want to keep doing. We can't expect just to completely change, overnight, because we're creatures of habit. But let me just, before we get to the break though, I'd like to just try to define these three wheels. So in the second turning the wheel of Dharma, I don't know, can you bear with me while they're serving tea? Okay, yeah, try. In the second turning the wheel of Dharma, then the Buddha is like, he said nothing inherently exists. It's a complete opposite from the first turning the wheel of Dharma. So that's the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. It's this radical rejection of anything, of any essence of anything from the side of the object. So nothing exists from the side of the object. Everything exists essentially through the force of mental imputation. Everything exists in dependence upon, yes, causes and conditions, yes, a collection of parts, but finally upon a collection of parts, we label. So like there's this band, there's a watch, there's, the battery, the parts inside, the face. Upon that, I label watch, and thereby watch exists. If there'd never been a mind with the idea, the concept of a watch, then that phenomena would never exist, right? So, and as a person, how do we exist? I mean, it kind of is more clear with the relation to a person that yes, there's a body, yes, there's a mind, yes, there's a stream of consciousness, but even that stream of consciousness is not really the person. Person only comes into existence when I look at all that phenomena and I have a sense of I'm a person. It's through the concept of I as a person that person exists, and everything exists like that through the power of mentally imputing upon a valid base, right? So if I take the watch and I impute mala on the watch, does that become a mala? No, because this is a mala. Like the basis has to kind of serve the function of whatever you're imputing it as. But yeah, so in short, like everything exists independent of our mental imputation, and therefore, but if you look within the parts of the watch, if I take it all apart, will I find anything within there that is the actual watch? No. It's just the whole thing together. Is that a watch? That we have to come back to later. But no, it's through, because if there's no concept of watch, even all the parts put together, they don't become a watch. It only becomes a watch. We only become a person in dependence upon the idea, like person. So then then we have a label, the name, like person or watch. And that refers to a thing. But the idea is when you search within the basis upon which you impute that thing, you just find a collection of parts, none of which is that thing. Therefore, from the side of the object, there's no essence of that. There's no essence of watchness in there. The watchness comes from the side of the mind imputing watch, not from the side of the object. So it's completely opposite. So in the first turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught everything from form to enlightenment. Everything exists by the force of its own characteristics, from its own side. It has an essence. And the second turn of the wheel of Dharma, he taught the very opposite. Nothing exists from its own side. Nothing exists by the force of its own characteristics. Everything is really imputed by the mind, right? And then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught, he kind of made this is where he taught the mind-only school, where he said, well, actually some things have an essence and some things don't. The mind has its own essence. Basically, everything else doesn't. Everything is essentially mind, right? He kind of made a middle way for those for whom the second turn of the wheel of Dharma is too radical. But the first turn of the wheel of Dharma is too boring. It's kind of the third turning wheel of Dharma is a middle way. Actually, the third turning wheel of Dharma has another special function, which I'll come back to after the break. Right. So let's offer our tea now. And then while we sip tea, we can keep chatting. Or you can, get up and go outside or, go to the toilet or whatever. But let's offer the tea together. So if you have, you can raise up. If you don't have yet, just imagine the tea you're about to get. Om Ahum, Om Ahum, Om Ahum. The Guru is Buddha, the Guru is Dharma, the Guru is Sangha also. The Guru is the source of all happiness. To all Gurus, I offer this tea. Enjoy.
teaching says catering like this.
Yeah, there is catering like this. Come on.
They bring around tea and roti.
Yeah.
No plastic cups.
Yeah. Okay. You write a letter to His Holiness office and suggest.
So Geshe, the second turning wheel was basically where the
Rajgir. The Vulture's Peak. Yeah, this is the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra. All the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are held to be. We debate about where they taught like one after the other in order, or all at the same time, or how were they taught. It's not entirely clear, but yeah. So the Buddha taught the first turn of the so the first turn of the wheel of Dharma kind of began at Sarnath, just 2 months after the Buddha was enlightened. But then the Buddha kept adding, teachings to that body of teachings throughout his whole life. But the second turn of the wheel of Dharma is 1 year after the Buddha became enlightened in Vulture's Peak in Rajgir. Then he taught there, and it says at the beginning of the Heart Sutra, to an assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. And His Holiness, the main audience was the bodhisattvas. People are on the bodhisattva path or suitable to follow the bodhisattva path. But then there's not much discussion of, like Perfection of Wisdom Sutras.
I didn't get a tea. Oh, you didn't get a glass. I'll have coffee then. Just whatever you've got. Sorry.
You just had coffee for breakfast and lunch.
No, but they don't have any black tea. I can't drink milk and they don't have black tea.
Oh,
I'm going to go and fetch me one.
I see.
I'll have coffee.
Yeah, there's not much discussion on Perfection of Wisdom Sutras being taught like later in the Buddha's life. So I'm not sure about that. That's one question I have. Also, I have a doubt, although about whether all the teachings that belong to the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, are they all also Perfection of Wisdom Sutras? Or are there some sutras that are, they also belong to the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma, but they're not Perfection of Wisdom Sutras? Like the King of Concentration Sutra, or the King of Samadhi Sutra, which is one of the most famous Mahayana sutras. And it clearly teaches the correct view of emptiness, that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. So it definitely belongs to the middle turning wheel of Dharma. But is that one of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras? Why or why not? I think it's probably not. Just because it doesn't have the name Perfection of Wisdom Sutra in the title. But that's not a very satisfying kind of reason, but it's hard to. The other day at this kata ceremony at Kopan, a lot of monks and nuns came and offered me a kata. No, so one of the geshimas, the best geshima actually from Kopan Nunnery, she was there, and I was asking her. I forgot her name. I'm not sure her name. You would know though. She's the one that gets up in debates like with the geshes all the time. She was the first one. There was the first two geshimas from Kopan. There was just two. One from Zum, and one from No, she just took, Tenzin Zopa's sister just took Geshima last year, or this year, or last year, just recently. No, this one's from like 4 years ago. And I'm not sure of her name, but she studied very well. She's a very good scholar. So she was sitting there, and I just took the opportunity to ask her what she thought, if all the sutras from the middle turning the wheel of Dharma are Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And she said, yeah, she thought they probably are. Well, she said definitely, if explicitly it teaches that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, teaches ultimate truth, and then implicitly it teaches the bodhisattva path, or indirectly teaches the bodhisattva path, then it's a Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. But then, usually the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras are enumerated as like 17 or 21, and the King of Concentration Sutra, for instance, is not included in them. So anyway, it's a bit of a doubt. I don't know, if you have other teachers, you ask them. Is there a difference between a sutra belonging to the middle turning the wheel of Dharma and a Perfection of Wisdom Sutra? Yeah, Karen?
So could you repeat how you describe the third turning of the wheel?
Yeah. The third turning of the wheel of Dharma is where, so remember the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught everything exists by force of its own characteristics. It has an essence. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma, nothing exists by force of its own characteristics. When you search for, the essence of a thing, it's unfindable. You cannot find. And the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, he divided all phenomena into three groups of things. One basically are permanent things. Well, permanent things other than emptiness. And then the other is impermanent things. And then the third is like ultimate truth or emptiness. So of those, he said, impermanent things and, hold on, Shenwan. So he said, basically, impermanent things and emptiness, what I said before was actually only the mind has an essence. Only the mind exists by force of its own characteristics. Like, because it's in the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught the mind-only school view, that everything is essentially one nature with the mind. Doesn't mean everything is consciousness, but everything is one nature with consciousness. There's a little difference. But but actually, that's true, but I think in these three divisions of things, in the third turn of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha taught both impermanent things and ultimate truth. They exist by force of their own characteristics, or they have an essence. But other permanent things, which, like I said, like the absence of a koala bear on the table, or uncompounded space, the mere lack of obstruction, those things are merely imputed by concepts. They don't have an inherent existence. So basically, he divided up phenomena into different groups and said some do exist from their own side and some don't. Yeah. Yeah. How's the tea?
No taste.
No, there is taste. That's the problem. That's what we'll talk about tomorrow a lot. In the Heart Sutra, when it says no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, what does that mean? I know. Do you need a break? Stand up and walk around. Okay. Then, do you have any questions? Any more questions?
To clarify about Golden Light Sutra,
Yes. Middle turning of the wheel. I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Golden Light Sutra. No, definitely the middle turning of the wheel of Dharma. So all the sutras. So sutras, remember, sutras are always the word of the Buddha. Teachings actually spoken by the Buddha. Right? As opposed to a commentary, like Nagarjuna's commentaries, they're not sutras, right? Because they're written or spoken by Nagarjuna, not the Buddha. But then there's some commentaries that are called sutras for different reasons. They have the name sutra in the title, but they're there's a lot of confusing things, but they're not actually spoken by the word of the Buddha. They're more like condensate, like kind of summaries of, or kind of summaries of the word of the Buddha, but not actually spoken by the word of the Buddha. Yes.
But are we able to classify the different sutras within the three turning wheels?
Yeah, all the sutras are included within the three turnings of the wheel. And so I didn't mention the third turning of the wheel. They're called first, second, third because in chronological order. The first sutra of the first turning of the wheel of Dharma was the first thing taught, right? And then the second turning of the wheel of Dharma was this completely different explanation of reality, basically, that was taught second. And then third turning of the wheel of Dharma is this kind of other way of explaining reality that was taught chronologically third. So it was taught at Vaishali about 10 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. So it was 2 months, then 1 year, and then about 10 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. But the second and the third turnings of the wheel of Dharma both belong to the Sanskrit canon, and both teach the bodhisattva path, right? So there's different ways of dividing the Buddha's teachings, right? You can divide like the Pali canon and the Sanskrit canon. And then that correlates strongly with the sutras that were taught for beings of a small or medium capacity, or the sutras taught for the beings of great capacity, those who aspire to achieve full enlightenment. So the second and the third turning wheel of Dharma are both taught for beings who aspire to full enlightenment. They both teach the bodhisattva path, how to become enlightened. Right?
So if we're gonna like organize it, Pali, Sanskrit, Vaishali, Sarnath, Vaishali, Sarnath, Rajgir, Vaishali.
Hold on, you can go again. How you're correlating? Yeah.
Yeah, so Sarnath, Pali.
Small turning of the wheel.
Small, lower capacity.
Lower capacity, yeah.
And then
Yes.
Rajgir.
And Pali
middle
canon.
capacity, Sanskrit.
No, Rajgir is great capacity.
Great capacity.
Bodhisattva path.
Bodhisattva path.
Sanskrit canon.
And then Vaishali.
Vaishali, Sanskrit canon,
Sanskrit
great
middle
capacity.
path, Great capacity.
Yeah, third, and that's the third turning of the wheel. Third turning of the wheel. Yeah, so the second turning of the wheel, taught in Rajgir, that also teaches the Bodhisattva path, and is part of the Sanskrit canon, which means so the Sanskrit canon versus the Pali canon, what it means is like, well, ostensibly, like the Buddha actually spoke what language he actually used. He spoke in different languages. So Pali is a more recent invention. Recent meaning like, I don't know, like 1,500, 2,000 years ago. But at the Buddha's time, there was a precursor to Pali, which is I think Prakrit, or some like the local language of like the Magadha kingdom, which is more like the common people's language, right? And apparently the sutras of the first turning wheel of Dharma, which are collected in the Pali canon, they were spoken in that more common people, everyday people's language. Because remember, the Buddhist teaching in Hindu society, which is a caste society, and the people at the top of the caste society are Brahmins, and they use Sanskrit. And so Sanskrit is a very elitist language. But the Buddha he wanted to break down the whole caste system and make spiritual practice available to everyone. So he taught in ordinary people's language, not so even in one Pali sutra it says that there's a scene where like two Brahmin youths who had become monks and are great, good at Sanskrit and poetry, they go to the Buddha and ask permission to translate all of his teachings into Sanskrit. And the Buddha says, no, I don't want my teachings translated, so they should be available to everyone, in their own language for people to understand. So then that's one of the main bases. Many followers of the Pali canon will say the whole Sanskrit canon is not actually the word of the Buddha. It's all something made up later by Buddhist monks or whoever who came after the Buddha. They'll discount the whole thing. Whereas followers of the Sanskrit canon, of course, they'll say it's the word of the Buddha, and they'll say but it was. And why were those teachings not so widespread and widely known immediately after the Buddha? I know but there's a story, Swayambhunath Stupa in here, the most sacred stupa probably in the Kathmandu Valley. There's a small, temple room next door with a door where it said that Nagarjuna retrieved the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras from the Naga realms, which are like, Nagas are typically like these kind of powerful spirits that live in water, bodies of water, like lakes or rivers, or some of the most powerful Nagas live in the ocean. And so there's a kind of mythical story that when the Buddha taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras in Rajgir, there were, in attendance, there were Nagas, and there were Devas, and there were like, humans from, Gandharvas, probably, I'm sure. There's all kinds of things. Yeah, at the end of this Heart Sutra, it mentions there, Gandharvas, which are like celestial musicians, right? Anyway, there are beings from different realms. And it's said that, once that teaching was finished, then I think something like because there's also supposed to be like a million or a billion verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. That was taken by the Devas to the Deva realm. So one version of this Perfection of Wisdom Sutras went to the Deva realm. One went to maybe the Gandharvas or something, and one went to the Naga realm. So the one that we have was retrieved from the Naga realm by Nagarjuna. Yeah. And where did he go? Where did he go down to the Naga realm? Through this door by Swambhunath. He went down to the Naga realm, like through that door, and then came back up to the door, retrieved that. Yeah, but that's kind of hard to believe, right? I mean, do you think there's really these powerful beings who live at the bottom of the ocean who had these sutras? I don't know. One of my teachers, he suggested that maybe because there is like Nagaland, you know. Yeah, in the northeast, far northeast. Yeah, it's near Assam, borders Assam, northeast India. And then some, you know, when you look at the earliest written versions of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras were found in Gilgit, which is there's new research. It's just like 20 years ago. There was this whole repository of Buddhist, very early Buddhist written folios, scriptures in like Afghanistan. There's this border area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, because it used to be a Buddhist region. Takshashila was this ancient center of study in like the current Peshawar Valley, you know. But there was this whole Gandharva kingdom, because remember Alexander the Great came, I don't know, like 350, 400 BC, all the way up to the Indus River, all the way to the border of kind of Punjab area now. And then left behind this Bactrian kingdom, you know, where there's Greek Indo mixed rulers. Anyway, there was this Gandharva kingdom. Some of the most famous Buddhist and most beautiful Buddhist artwork came from that kingdom. That really shiny black stone was Gandharva, and this special style where you see, you know, there's this famous statue of the Buddha where he's the fasting Buddha, where his stomach is totally sunken and his eyes are sunken, and you see all these veins, and he has long hair and a beard, but he looks kind of Greek, right? He has a beard and he has like a mustache. You know? Yeah, that's from the Gandharva kingdom. But there's this, just like 20, 30 years ago, there was this discovery of these Buddhist scriptures, which include some versions of some of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that are carbon dated to like 100 BC, right? So yeah, that's really old. That's among the oldest written Buddhist scriptures. So, I mean, you look at the Pali Canon, because, I mean, for those who say that, the Pali Canon predates the Mahayana, the Sanskrit canon, but then if you look at the actual Buddhist scriptures we have, they're the same. It's not like you have Pali scriptures that can be carbon dated to like 300 BC or something. Remember, Buddha lived around, 300 BC, no? 400, or was it earlier?
500 BC.
2,500 years ago. Yeah, so about 500 BC. Yeah, he would be before Alexander the Great, of course. Yeah, 500 BC. So as far as like, you know, what physical scriptures you can find, they're similar in age.
And where it is now, is it the oldest scripture?
Where it is now? In some university library somewhere. I don't know.
The actual text would be probably put in some climate controlled vaults and very rarely seen, or because they'd be so fragile that exposure to light and any touching could break them down. So they must like photograph them or something, and then those very, very ancient texts are extremely, what can I say, you know, they'd be highly protected. People wouldn't be studying from them, you know.
Yeah.
They would have been photographed and then stored.
Yeah, you should organize. You're an SBC, right? No, seriously, it'd be good to go on pilgrimage to those places. No, but you know, to get more information though, just as a note, that's why we made this WhatsApp group and send out these especially the sutras translated by the 84,000 Project. They have very good introductions. So that's what I've been reading to prepare for this weekend, is some of the introductions from those. So there's a lot of this kind of information there, and they all have like kind of academic citations. So they're good. If you want to know more, I would start with those kind of introductions.
I'm sorry. Just to add to Geshe-la's, the place we're going tomorrow, there's
please,
100,000 Prajnaparamita. It's all different.
Which version of the Prajnaparamita?
Sahastra is in Sanskrit, not Sanskrit. Yeah, they're all. It's supposed to be brought up by Nagarjuna. That's the one.
That one.
That one.
Amazing.
I mean, that's the oldest monastery in Nepal. The one we're visiting tomorrow. So they have this 100,000 lines verses, Sahastra Prajnaparamita, and it's supposed to be. I mean, the guy will tell more there. It's supposed to be the one that was brought from Swayambhunath, from the Nagar realm. So that is the one.
What is the substance of the text? What is it? The material?
This material is it's kind of leaf.
Yeah.
It's especially only found in Nepal.
Okay.
So I mean, back in the days in Tibet, they used to order a lot of those from here.
Okay.
Oh, really?
We will know more tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that is the oldest. It's called Vikramshila Mahabihar. It's from Atisa. I mean, it's the same one connection there.
Yeah.
From
the monastery in India called Vikramshila.
So did Atisha come through?
Yeah.
I mean, how long did he stay?
Literally next door.
He stayed there for I think 1.5 years.
Okay.
And he renovated the place.
Oh,
The
yeah.
monastery was already there. So he found the importance of this place midway between Nalanda, Vikramshila, and Tibet, right? So he found the importance. This is a halfway house, I mean, in transit house. Like a lot of Tibetan, a lot of Nalanda masters came there. They did a lot of translation, everything. So he found the importance, and that's why he renovated the place. The place was already there. The Bihar was already there. A little bit ruined, but he renovated.
Nice.
He didn't build from scratch.
So on his
For
way
sure.
to Tibet.
Yeah, when he stayed there,
Okay.
here.
Okay.
And probably he walked here also.
Actually, I think the first settlers of the Kathmandu Valley, it was at that time called Manjupatan.
Yeah.
And when Manjushri first kind of like crowned the first king, King Dharmakara, was right here in Tamil. It's like the like the first. Now it's like a tourist hub. It was like I think the first settlers of the valley is from here. That's why these are some of the oldest temples.
Is there any story where the first settlers came from? Did they come from the Indian plains up or from the Tibetan plateau down or somewhere else? Any idea?
They just came from the ground.
Really?
That's how they claim. I mean, if you
Really? They claim like
No,
that?
if you tell them you came from your ancestry is from there, they don't say it. We just
Yeah.
I mean, the Newars are what they say, the indigenous people of the valley. The indigenous valley there.
they're mix of little bit of
Mix.
yeah.
Mix of like
Tibetan and the South Indian.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's why Venerable Sera asked us to do this course, on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, because of that.
That's the reason why Lama Rinpoche gifted us this. Due to now I know retrospectively. I mean, back then I didn't know why this. I mean, so now I know why. He
So this is the same sutra that's in there, except
except in
it's an
not in
old
Sanskrit,
original
but
version.
In, what you call Ranjana Lipi. Ranjana Lipi is like more like I don't know Newar.
Yeah.
I think they claim that's the original one. But like you said, I think it might not be the original, but like what you call that replication. But original one they might have kept somewhere else, Like you said, in a vault, in a very safe place. But this one is for display, so it's more like. I mean, this is my assumption. I don't know. Otherwise, why they would open and show it to other people, right? If it's really fragile, they might have original somewhere else. I mean, they're not telling us.
Oh yeah. So just a couple. Well, one thing more about the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So the reason we're talking about that is because the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras all belong to the second turning of the wheel. But then His Holiness always explains, like, kind of like this. Like I was saying, in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, mainly the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths as this kind of overarching structure for all of the rest of his teachings. They all fit within that. But then in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught the most profound understanding of selflessness, of dependent arising, and the most deep implication of dependent arising of all phenomena is that nothing exists by its own nature. Nothing exists from its own side. And these days, His Holiness always compares that view to the view of quantum physics, where at the most subtle level of physical things, that the most quanta, or most kind of fundamental building blocks of all physical matter are neither, like from their own side, they're neither a wave or a particle. They can function as both, independent upon the conditions. And so they're the way they exist, even basic things about the way they exist, whether they exist in one location, whether they have a specific velocity or not, it doesn't exist from the side of the object, but rather it's a kind of interdependently arising kind of phenomena. It's completely malleable. So in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught the most profound view of emptiness, and then also taught the bodhisattva path. So indirectly was taught, how do you become, for one who can adopt this vast perspective of, can adopt this vast altruistic mind, thinking that, I will devote my life to working for the welfare of all sentient beings, irregardless, without leaving out even one. Then, and for the welfare of all, I want to become enlightened. Then what's the path of practice? So he also taught the bodhisattva path in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma. And then the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, okay, so it has this kind of more limited view of, selflessness, where some phenomena do have an essential essence and others don't. But so that's not so important. What's more important actually is in the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught Buddha nature, how the reasons for, the analogies for, and reasons why all sentient beings have the potential to become fully enlightened. That's not so clearly explained in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma. So in the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, we emphasize the nature of the mind, speaking about the nature of the mind. And because the mind is something that is fundamentally that which is clear and knowing, then that clear knowing nature of mind in general is not polluted by any afflictive emotions. So, and then he gave like this famous 11 analogies. So it's like the sky, or like a mirror, or like clear water, three of the most famous. But just like the sky, it's this vast clear space, which sometimes there's clouds, but the clouds, they obscure the light, the sunlight in the sky, obscure us from seeing, but they're not of the nature of the sky. So eventually they can be cleared away. Also smoke or dust or whatever, or even the sunlight and the starlight. None of those things are fixed in the space of the sky. Rather, the sky is just like this vast space, which is by nature like clear of anything. Anything can appear and pass through it, but none of those things are fixed in the face of that. So therefore, it means however much the sky's, pollutants don't work so much well with the sky, but I guess it does work. However much the sky, the atmosphere is polluted, it's possible to be cleaned out. That one works better with water. So water, the nature is just H2O, or what's the definition of water? Well, that's more like definition of liquidity is that which is wet and moistening. But water is, no matter how much there's mud or pollutants or oil or whatever in water, it can always be passed through a filter and separated from the water. The pollutants are never of the nature of the water. So again, our mind are like that. No matter how much there's anger or self-doubt or worry or anxiety, those disturbing states of mind are never of the nature of the mind itself. The nature of the mind itself is rather just kind of radiance and knowing and being aware. So the more like a mirror, the other analogy, like a mirror, no matter how much dust there is on the mirror, it can always be wiped away. And the more you clean the dust off the mirror, the more it clearly reflects like what exists around, right? So similarly, the more you purify the mind of disturbing and distorted, understandings, of disturbing emotions and incorrect understanding of the way things are, the more you purify the mind, the more it naturally just knows reality as it is. It becomes more and more clearly and kind of vastly aware of the nature of oneself, of the nature of others, of the nature of reality. And so those are all reasons why then every being who has a mind thereby has the potential to achieve full enlightenment, right? So it's called the Tathagata Garbha, or this Buddha essence, or Deshin Shepe Ningbo, the essence of the thus. Deshin Shekpa, it means like one thus gone. It means one who's gone beyond all faults to the farthest shore of perfection, developing all positive qualities. And the essence of that is this nature of our mind. So then that becomes another. I mean, in addition to having compassion for all sentient beings, because we're all interconnected, because every enjoyment we have comes about in dependence upon others. Another reason to care about other sentient beings, okay, so there's different reasons. One is just because we recognize how we need to be cared about for others. We need help from others. We appreciate, loving kindness from our mother, our father, our friends. Like without that, as social, human beings, as social creatures, we would die, or we would be completely miserable and kind of really messed up just on our own. So, so we need kindness and caring and support from others, and therefore, we should give that to others, because others need the same thing we do. So, so you kind of you reap what you sow. The golden rule: you reap what you sow. So if you want kindness and consideration, respect from others, then you need to offer that to others, right? So that's one reason to care about others. Another is this reasoning of that we're all interconnected. So when I harm another person, actually, because we're interconnected, in the long run, actually, I'm harming myself. Indirectly, I'm harming myself. When I pollute, the water here that's flowing downstream, eventually it's going to come back to harm me. So everything, again, like everything that goes around comes around, because we're all interconnected. But then the third reason to care about sentient beings is because every sentient being, every being with a mind, it's something very precious in and of itself, because they have the potential for full enlightenment, right? So not only I have oneself has the potential for full enlightenment, every other sentient being with a mind, they also have potential for full enlightenment. Therefore, the smallest insect, whether it's an ant or a mosquito, up to whales, elephants, dogs, cats, every other human being, whatever man, woman, whatever race or creed, whatever their beliefs, whatever their behavior is, no matter how destructive their behavior is, they still have a mind and a potential for full enlightenment. And therefore, we should never give up caring for any sentient being. Right? We should care for every sentient being, because our caring for that sentient being nurtures that potential for enlightenment in them, and our doing that nurtures our own potential for enlightenment as well, of course, right? So, so one is extremely important thing about the third turning wheel of the Dharma is it gives these analogies and gives us clear teaching about the pure nature of the mind, and how that's a basis for recognizing that oneself and others all have the potential for enlightenment. And then that becomes a basis for Tantra, for all the teachings of Tantra. Because the Tantra they're not sutras, they're also the word of the Buddha. But I was trying to think, how do you define, distinguish Tantras from sutras? Because they're also the word of the Buddha, but they're not included in the sutra teachings of the Buddha, right? So basically, I think the best way to define is just in the tantric teachings of the Buddha, there's kind of, the main distinguishing characteristic is the Buddha taught what's called deity yoga, right? Deity yoga, where one imagines oneself already, it's called the resultant path, right? The sutra teachings are all called the causal path, because when you're practicing those teachings, you always, let's see. Basically, you always see yourself in your ordinary form and see the enlightenment as up here, and you're working towards enlightenment, right? Whereas in the Tantra teachings, then the Buddha taught, there's another method of achieving enlightenment where you take the result into the path. It means you imagine the quickest way to achieve that result is to imagine what it would be like. Imagine that you have achieved that result already now, and then practice from within that perspective of, if I was a Buddha now, like, what would I do? How would I see the world? How would I act? And that becomes actually the quickest path. So it's that kind of a very different sort of way of looking at the Buddhist path and way of practicing, where you basically, you visualize yourself as a deity. And the Buddha taught those teachings in the aspect, primarily, except for the Kalachakra Tantra, primarily in the aspect, not in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha, but in a different aspect of the deity of the mandala that he was teaching. So that's a whole different set of teachings. But those teachings are all, why it's relevant here is because they're all based on this recognition that we have the potential for full enlightenment by virtue of having a mind, right? And so the question then, what's the quickest way to actualize that potential for the potential for full enlightenment that the mind has by its very nature? Like, what's the quickest way to actualize that potential? So it's essential to practice deity yoga. You're not, when you imagine yourself arising as a deity, you're not imagining your ordinary body and your ordinary kind of deluded mind arising as a deity. That's completely ridiculous. That just doesn't work, right? But rather, you recognize this pure nature of the mind that's been there since beginningless time. It's there now. It will always be there, no matter what happens. And you imagine transforming that most pure level, most subtle and pure level of mind into wisdom realizing emptiness and into great compassion. And then that mind arises, in the body in the aspect of a deity. So so that's the kind of special function of the third turning wheel of Dharma, to show us our own Buddha nature, and that to act as a basis for the practice of Tantra. Yes.
And you were saying the Buddha actually taught that technique as well?
Yes. But then again, I say yes because my teachers all say yes. But if you ask a Western academic, they'll be like, probably not, actually. Yeah.
What do they know?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. What do they know is one question, but like, what are they like is the more important question. I tend to believe my own teachers because they're such impressive beings, and I want to be like that. So of course, I have faith that they know what they're talking about, because obviously they've achieved some, state of maturity, wisdom, kindness, some state of being, this, amazing kind of being, that person that I like to be like, that I haven't met any academic that's anything like that. So, exactly. But the academics, at least for myself, I find it important to also look at, well, what do Western academics say about that? Because we're rational beings, right? And if they have good reason for saying, no, the Tantras were something, it's a much later development in Buddhism, it's made up much, hundreds of years after the time of the Buddha, then, there's two ways to respond to that. Either we come up with a rational response to that, be like, well, maybe that's not true, because the traditional explanation of why the Tantras are the way of the Buddha is, there is a rational explanation because of this, or we just kind of ignore what they're saying, right? But if you just ignore what someone says, you can't do that forever, no? So I think I don't know. I think as an educated kind of modern Western person, it's important to know, like, okay, what is the academic perspective on what the Tantras are, and then find some way in your own mind to make peace with that, not by like just taking it at face value, but understanding, well, they're looking at this thing, and that's why they see it in this way. But His Holiness and my other teachers, they're looking at this, and this is their reasons for saying that is the word of the Buddha. Like I find his, I mean, and if you're interested, we can go through those reasons. I find His Holiness reasons. I mean, there's reasons, one, for why the Sanskrit canon is the word of the Buddha, and then two, for why the Tantric teachings are also the word of the Buddha. Sanskrit canon is a little easier because historically it arose much closer to the time of the Buddha. And this kind of, empirical evidence of these ancient scriptures being very old, that also becomes quite good, strong evidence. But like His Holiness, one of His Holiness' main reasons for saying the Sanskrit canon is the teaching of the Buddha is because Nagarjuna felt it was. And he's this incredible rational, brilliant rational mind who's, looking at these subtle different, using reason to look at these subtle differences between different, the mind-only school, the Vaibhashika school, Sutra school, these different assertions about Buddhist teachings, and really kind of focusing in, or not focusing in, really kind of distilling what is the truth. And if you use your own reason, like usually His Holiness says, for people with a modern education, when you approach, when you first start to study Buddhist teachings, it's good to study emptiness like right at the beginning. Because emptiness is, the Buddhist teachings on emptiness is something, it doesn't apply to like belief in past and future lives. It doesn't, like karma is, a lot of it's outside of kind of reason. I mean, there's reason to support it, but then there's all kind of other things. But emptiness is really quite, with quite straightforward logic. Like think about the analysis we did, when you look through, like look at your own body and mind, what am I? Where is the I? Anybody can do that. And so you can get quite a good sense of, the profundity of the Buddhist teachings by thinking about the interdependent arising and how that means that nothing exists in and of itself from its own side. And so Nagarjuna is someone who really clarified that reasoning, right? A very logical person. And he accepted that the Sanskrit teachings are the teachings of the Buddha. That's one reason. Another reason is just because it's very clearly true. If you compare the view of emptiness in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma and the view of emptiness in the, they're clearly not like the Buddha. They're the level of realization, their abilities, their skill at leading disciples, their understanding is clearly not the same as Shakyamuni Buddha. But yet there's no explanation of, well, how do you become like Shakyamuni Buddha? In the Pali Canon, it's all explained. How do you become like Shariputra Moggallana? That's laid out very clearly. But then, and there's mention of bodhisattvas, and there's clearly Buddhas. But how do you actually become a Buddha? That's not really clearly explained in the Pali Canon. Whereas in the Sanskrit Canon, that's made like almost crystal clear. Not totally. That's where you need Tantra. That's why His Holiness, it's another reason to say that Tantra is also the teaching of the Buddha, because it's only through the teachings of Tantra that you can really understand how an ordinary person can become a Buddha. You really can't fully understand it just on the basis of the sutras. And then another reason that His Holiness will say that Tantras are the teaching of the Buddha is again because Nagarjuna clearly held that they are. I mean, Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, his direct disciple, and then Shantideva, Chandakirti, Atisha, they all accept that the tantric teachings are valid teachings of the Buddha. And one of the main evidence, actually, His Holiness often refers to a Nepali scholar. I wonder if you know of that. There was some, I believe it's Nepali, or maybe it's an Indian Sanskrit scholar. There's one Sanskrit scholar who discovered some very, very old composition by Aryadeva in Nepal. That's a commentary on Tantra, and saying that it's clear evidence that Aryadeva definitely, on Guhya Samaj, I believe, that Aryadeva definitely held, and Nagarjuna definitely held that the main Tantra, Guhya Samaj Tantra, is a teaching of the Buddha, is a valid teaching of the Buddha. So that's one reason. I think that's the main things I wanted to talk about today. We have about a half hour left. But yeah, any questions?
I have a question again about tantric teachings. So, in a mystic way, or like a not the logical or scientific way. I heard that actually it was Buddha in the appearance of Vajradhara who taught Tantra.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think that's the main way the Buddha appeared was as Vajradhara. But when the Buddha taught the Kala Chakra, I believe it was in the aspect of just, as a fully ordained monk. But I could swear I heard, I don't know, I can't cite a source, but that the Buddha appeared as other deities of other mandalas. But maybe I'm mistaken about that. Maybe it was Vajradhara. I'm not 100% sure about that. How did the Buddha appear when he taught different tantras? I'm not 100% sure. Do you remember where you heard that he appeared as Vajradhara to teach?
I think it was one of the Geshes in Mongolia. I heard from him.
Yeah, maybe I can ask someone tonight or tomorrow, something at Kopang. Or someone else. That I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, Isaac?
So I think maybe other people will relate to this. I'm hoping, I practice a Goenka style Vipassana retreat, and he taught from the Pali canon and sort of presented this, the techniques of Anapana and Vipassana, sort of like, this is the path that the Buddha taught in the language that the Buddha spoke, and it's without anything else added in or distorted or changed. So this is the technique that the Buddha taught.
Right.
And sort of that very, this is it, this is it, this is the path sort of approach to teaching. And I found it very beneficial. But then I also was a little bit confused, learning more about like the Vajrayana path and Tantra, and just kind of the way that implied that, all of those teachings were things that were sort of added on later by other people, potentially like distortions or like sort of forming a religion around the Buddha and forming all of these, iconographies and all of this ritual ceremony sort of around the Buddha, but a lot of it, things like the Yidam visualizations and a lot of the mantras and the deities and all that sort of being other things that were added on that weren't actually what the Buddha taught. Right. And so I kind of had this and I was like, I kind of like wrestling between those perspectives because kind of like by analogy, like, I grew up in the Catholic Church and it's sort of like that institution that builds up around, when Jesus died, but a lot of it isn't what Jesus taught. Right. So it's sort of like, I wonder, like, I just, I have so much appreciation for Tantra. I have so much appreciation for Tantra and Tibetan Buddhism. I also wondering, like, because that's why I wanted to ask about whether the Buddha taught Tantra or deity yoga, because I'm like, I kind of thought this was something that people added on, or even like the teaching that, imagine that you've achieved the result already now, and then look at the path that way. Yeah. And then if you imagine yourself as a deity, it's kind of like a culturally specific thing. Like these are the deities that the people imagined, right? Right. And so like, other people would imagine different deities or whatever, but it's sort of that's like one approach on how you can do that. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there because it's something I've been kind of.
No, it's a difficult question, though, and it's one that I know many people find quite problematic. I've had many friends who they love the teachings on compassion, on bodhicitta, aspiration to become fully enlightened, the whole bodhisattva path. But then in Tibetan Buddhism, Tantra is so all pervasive. Especially if you're going to become ordained and live in a community, you can't avoid it. But then sometimes people really feel like, how can that be the teaching of the Buddha? It's so, especially like the wrathful deities and the protector prayers and, offering alcohol and tea and meat and stuff. It's just like, it can seem a little bit crazy when especially you come from, if you're really rooted in that kind of insight and meditation sort of technique. It seems like bizarre, almost like completely antithetical to what the Buddha taught in a way. And then they get frustrated and leave because of that, which is unfortunate. But But yeah, I mean, that's again another example where you can see the Buddha taught different kinds of teachings for different types of individuals. I mean, but I think, do you have, one, I mean, it's important. Well, there's so many different dangers. Another danger is like from the perspective, if you accept, the Mahayana canon, I mean, the Sanskrit canon, all the tantras of the teaching of the Buddha, there's a big danger that you start to disparage the Pali canon and say, oh, that's not really beneficial. That's just for people who are very small capacity, like, it's like, that's like just the cheap appetizers. Who wants that? You need the entree. But that's also, I mean, all of that is abandoning the Dharma, So that's one of the heaviest, in terms of Buddhist practice. So it's one of the heaviest negative things you can do is to look at any of the teachings of the Buddha and say, that's not the teaching of the Buddha, that's not benefiting sentient beings. Because the Buddha taught out of great compassion for every sentient being. And there's countless different kinds of sentient beings, each with different mental capacity and different disposition, different likes and dislikes, different needs. And the Buddha taught, very specific teachings for each of those different types of individuals. So just because, all different aspects of one aspect of the Buddhist teachings we don't find very appealing or very believable or very useful, that doesn't mean it's not useful or appealing or, for someone or beneficial for someone. Just like world religions. I mean, every religion in the world is useful for someone. Otherwise, it would have died out a long time ago, right? So just like we should have respect for all the different religious teachings and teachers in the world, as long as they're, of course, upright and ethical and so forth. By appreciating how they benefit sentient beings, we should have respect for all different aspects of the Buddhist teachings and how they benefit beings in different ways. Of course, any of them can be misused, and any of them can become a basis for arrogance and pride and kind of division, which is unfortunate, but it happens. But as a person, as an individual, we also just have to. And I think, I know. I also, of course, came from a Christian background, and I found that as a new Buddhist is one of the most difficult things about kind of taking up Buddhist practice is to decide which teachers to follow and which teachers not to follow, which teachings to engage with and which ones to not engage with. But you just kind of have to do that and expect. It's just a growing pain of the part of being a Buddhist, and and especially it's important not to feel like because I'm following a Tibetan Buddhist teacher and I'm practicing Tibetan Buddhism that I have to eat everything on the table. You can leave stuff, you can leave parts you're not comfortable with. Just you can leave it. I mean, especially there's a danger because people often they go to a Kopan course and they love Lamrim course, and then the same teacher is giving an initiation like Hayasuka Tantra initiation. Everybody's going, so then I have to go too.
Fear of missing out.
Yeah. But then you easily end up with commitments to do daily practices and expectations that you participate in all other practices that you don't understand, you're not comfortable with. And when you go back home, you really don't want. So it's really better with taking vows, like taking refuge vows, taking bodhisattva vows, taking tantric vows, go slowly and kind of get a clear sense of what that entails, what you're getting into, if that's really something you can keep in the long term or not, and that's really you want to make part of your life for the long term or not. So it's better to go slowly and kind of, and that's another reason I'm saying is like with Tantra as an example, it's good to know, well, what are the potential hangups that might come? Like if you take a Tantric initiation because there's this very charismatic teacher and they're giving and then you take, but then later you meet in a cafe, you meet this Western academic who's like, yeah, well, I've done all this research on the Tantras and clearly they're written only 1,000 years after the Buddha at the earliest. So how could it be the teaching of the Buddha? And then you get all these doubts. And then you're like, well, what am I doing? That's not a comfortable position to be in. So you want to avoid that. But then, but a way to think about the tantric teachings of the Buddha is, the written texts, in the root tantras, maybe they only appeared many hundreds of years after the Buddha, during this period of incredible kind of incredible, profound development of spiritual practice in northern India, not only in the Buddhist sphere, but also in the Hindu sphere, all different kinds of yogas. It's an incredible, I think, an incredible era, epoch of like profound sort of philosophy and spiritual practice, where beings, generated these incredible realizations. Look at the development of like philosophy in the West, and the logic and the reasoning is as rich, basically, as in Eastern philosophy, but there's no practice of meditation, right? There's no practice of like learning to focus your mind on one object, and thereby accessing more and more subtle levels of mind. This is totally absent from Western practice, as far as I can tell. And so the whole trajectory of the growth of Western philosophy has become, to now, it's just totally dry, analytic, like kind of thing, totally unrelated to personal practice, largely. Whereas the trajectory of Eastern philosophy is always mixed with spiritual beliefs and kind of becoming a better person. But back to, when we say like, what is the actual teaching of the Buddha or not, usually people are referring to, the historical Shakyamuni Buddha. But I mean, think about what is a Buddha, right? First of all, a Buddha is someone who's, they're omniscient mind, they have abandoned all faults and perfected every positive quality. And this is where there's a huge difference in the Pali canon and the Sanskrit canon. In the Pali canon, the way it's, the traditional interpretation would be that when a person achieves enlightenment, so when Prince Siddhartha achieved full enlightenment, then they live out that life, but then at the time of death, the entire continuum ceases to exist, right? So according to the Pali Canon kind of view is that Shakyamuni Buddha doesn't exist now. He reached 80 years old and then he died. At the time he died, not only his body ceased to function, but his mental continuum also ceased, right? And so he doesn't exist after that. So the only teachings that the Buddha could have given were given during those 80 years of his life. Whereas, whereas the Sanskrit canon view of a person is that even if a person, because what is it to achieve enlightenment? You abandon all like ignorance, all attachment, all anger, all selfishness. So abandon all faults of the mind. And so you're not under the control of karma anymore. So, well, maybe just to skip back. So the Pali canon view is that why does the mental continuum cease? Because you achieve, so say we achieve enlightenment in this body. So this body is a projection of past karma, right? The karma that threw us into this rebirth, that karma decides how long we'll remain in this life, right? So there's, we died from a past life, and then there's a karma to throw us into this rebirth as a human, and that karma, through the strength of that karma, that through this life will remain a certain amount of time. We have karma to remain in this life a certain amount of time. So that's through the force of karma. So even if we become enlightened in this life, we're no longer under the control of karma, but still the karma that through this rebirth, it's going to more or less determine how long we remain, right? So then once that karma finishes, because we've abandoned all afflictive emotions, there's no force, there's no self-grasping to throw us into another life. The main things that throws a rebirth is as we're dying, we're afraid. Oh no, I'm ceasing to exist. And we grasp at the I, and that throws us into another life as an individual again. So think if we're totally free of that, self-grasping, which tomorrow we'll read some very nice passages where the Buddha talks about how, a Buddha, how he's like that, totally free of grasping at a person, grasping at a self, grasping at an individual. So imagine, in this life, you realize selflessness, you're completely free of grasping. So then, of course, at the time of death, there's no fear, there's no grasping at anything. You're just completely accepting of what's happening. So in the Pali Canon view, then your karma to live in this life ends, and no further karma to take rebirth is triggered, and so you cease to exist, right? Whereas in the Sanskrit canon view, then it's not only karma that projects us into a next moment of awareness. So forget about, okay, future life for the minute. What causes one moment of awareness to arise after the next? Kind of like you were saying, Isaac, when you look at your mind, it looks like even if, you're not intending anything, thinking anything, it's like just the nature of this kind of, this like the field of awareness, the underlying basic awareness that is, it's like the field of potential for every other experience that we have. It seems like there's just this kind of natural energy for awareness just to continue arising through time. Okay, forget about our body. Imagine we didn't have a body and we were just a mind for a minute. Doesn't it seem like the mind itself has this energy such that it just produces the next moment of awareness, apart from karma? So that's the Sanskrit kind of canon view, is that basically, in the most basic kind of, constituent of us as a person, the most basic thing of us as a person, is this stream of consciousness. And that, even if you completely purify it, it's like the power of that stream of consciousness, it just continues to exist infinitely. It has no beginning and it has no end. So no matter how much you purify it, and then you die from this life, that's not going to cut the stream of consciousness, right? That stream of consciousness will continue on. So then, okay, so this is all about like, why is Tantra valid, right? Don't forget that. So then go back to like, what is a Buddha? The one who taught so when people say like, okay, the Tantra can't have been taught by the Buddha, they're thinking about the historical Buddha, with the idea that historical Buddha died when he's 80 and then didn't exist after that. In the Sanskrit canon view, the Buddha still exists now. Shakyamuni Buddha, his continuum of consciousness exists now. Someone tomorrow, if they purify their mind enough, they could have a direct vision of Buddha and receive a teaching, and that would be considered a teaching of the Buddha. I mean, it's not like, so the Buddha can teach in the aspect of Vajradhara long after the historical Buddha ceased to exist. And that could still be, I mean, because that enlightened mind continues to exist, still exist. Oftentimes, His Holiness, I mean, in the past, when His Holiness was speaking about this, he would mention this Achan Mun, is a famous Thai master, Achan Mun, who was renowned as being an arhat in that life and clearly had clairvoyance and would have direct visions of many worldly deities, would give teachings to devas through the night. And apparently, in one vision, he had a direct vision of Shakyamuni Buddha. And received, I don't know if he just saw him or received teachings, but through his vision of Shakyamuni Buddha, he was convinced that actually Buddha does exist still. That actually his view, that the Pali Canon view that the Buddha ceased to exist, is wrong, and that actually the Buddha's continuum has carried on. So that's the Sanskrit canon view. So that when a person becomes enlightened, of course, in that aspect, they cease to exist. And that's why in the Sanskrit, the Buddhist societies that follow, the Mahayana path, the Sanskrit canon, like in Tibetan, they accept His Holiness as the 14th Dalai Lama, because the continuum, the mental continuum and the continuum of the person carries on and continues to work for the welfare of sentient beings. Yes?
I was going to say also another aspect of this sort of faith-based answer to the academic skepticism about Tantra being the teachings of the Buddha. I mean, you know this, but I'm just going to say it.
Sure, please.
So the academics are looking at concrete, physical, material evidence when scriptures appear, carbon dating of scriptures and so forth, and they're going, that shows when Tantra emerged. Well, there's no evidence prior to that Tantra emerged.
True, yeah.
And the faith-based answer is that these are ear-whispered lineages, that the disciples for Tantra in the Buddha's life were highly realized yogis. It wasn't a teaching for the common people. It was secret, passed from highly realized disciple to highly realized disciple, and it didn't get written down for centuries.
Yeah.
So it appeared in society centuries later, the manifest evidence that an academic scholar could trace showed up as material centuries later, but the faith-based answer is it was out there as
Yeah.
disciple, guru to disciple transmission.
Yeah, and like we were discussing the other day, even taught on different planes. Like the academic perspective is like our human plane of reality is the only one. Like basically, or maybe animals, but gods and past and future lives is just kind of nonsense, right? Whereas, I mean, the more traditional view is there are other planes, there are other beings who can also be suitable receptacles for Buddhist teachings. And, like devas, like kind of, I don't know, gods, goddesses, celestial beings with, much more subtle bodies than ours, just that we can't see, or nagas, who also have intelligence, who also can receive Buddhist teachings. And so even Shakyamuni Buddha was giving, during that, appearing in that human form, but he was giving teachings to beings in other realms that are not accessible to an ordinary human perception, right? And those tantric teachings, like Kalachakra teaching, famously taught in Amaravati in South India, to this, we say like a mythical king of like Shambhala or something, but maybe doesn't exist in an ordinary human realm, but maybe exists in a different kind of plane of reality. Just like we don't know what it's like to be a bee, right? The bee's perception of flowers is inaccessible to us. And what it's like for them to live in a hive and experience the world is inaccessible to us. But at least we can see their body and we know many things about them. We can dissect them and whatever. But there could be beings on other planes of reality that we don't, we can't access, but the Buddha can interact with them. So that's another possible explanation. Yes.
Going along with that, I've always been curious about like sort of the understanding that kind of like harming animals, obviously we're taught to not harm animals, and a lot of people don't eat meat for that reason. But then I wonder sometimes like how we know whether plants might not be like almost more enlightened than us or something. I know that sounds silly, but I wonder about the way that we kind of anthropomorphize creatures and sentient beings seem to really reflect our human experience. I was wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, we definitely anthropomorphize animals. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to make the argument that plants are more enlightened than, or more, I don't know, enlightened, maybe it's not the word, more that they have the same mental ability, even if they had consciousness or some, variety of consciousness, like feelings. Like feelings, just feeling good, feeling bad, feeling pleasure, feeling pain is one of the most kind of basic levels of conscious experience. So if I was going to, make the argument that plants have some degree of conscious experience, it would be the level of feelings. Certainly they don't think about like, what do I want to do later today or something, or make plans like, or even, but then do they, like animals, maybe they don't have that kind of conceptual cognition, but like making plans for the future, but they definitely like care about their young, especially mammals. And they have, quite intricate social interactions. The plants we can see on a chemical level, they have, especially there's, new research lately about how like mitochondria or fungus, there's these massive like networks over hundreds of miles that connect the whole communities of different kinds of trees, and they exchange nutrients and so forth. So that's very interesting research. Like, and it seems like on a chemical level, yeah, there's even different species of plants interacting with and supporting like one another, not only in like just kind of selfish competition, but supporting each other. But does that entail like a sort of caring about one another or not? I mean, I don't know. That's difficult to see. With mammals, we can see that they care about one another, right, by the way they behave. But with plants, of course, they don't, we can't see that kind of behavior just because of the nature of what a plant is. But if there's that kind of exchange of nutrients, for example, then what does that indicate about their kind of any level of awareness? Yeah, I don't know. It's that whole kind of because I mean, Buddhist view is basically, in terms of Western philosophy, is dualism, that consciousness is one kind of substance and matter is a different kind of substance. But then for any dualist view, then the difficulty is, well, how do matter and consciousness interact, right? And how do you draw the line between levels of matter that can be affected by consciousness and levels of matter that can't be affected by consciousness? And that all relates to like what kind of, you know, like, I don't know, what kind of things have consciousness or are affected by consciousness, can sustain consciousness, what kind of things can't. I was asking, you know, were you in that course? No, Hans and Mariana, who taught that mind science course? Oh, yeah. There was these two teachers at Kopan was teaching, who are microbiologists by training. I was asking them, you know, their study of microorganisms, because that's the really interesting place to look, is single-celled organisms. Some are supposed to be animals and some are supposed to be plants. And what's the difference between them? According to the Buddhist view, then the ones that are animals have consciousness and the ones that are plants don't. But how can you say that? Like what? And they were saying they don't really know. They don't really. It's not clear. But
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure. Yeah.
So I was also really thinking about karma, and I think until, a lot of people hear the word karma and don't really understand it, and maybe you never fully understand it, but I think I started to really click with it when I started thinking about it not as a sort of like a written word that exists, like something that exists outside of ourselves. I started thinking of it as kind of like the intersection between mind and reality, or something that exists at that intersection. And I think I find it sort of confusing when we try to think about like what my karma is, or like what one being's karma is, when it's interconnected to every being. And so I was wondering how we sort of pinpoint one being's karma.
Well, it's because karma, the definition of karma is the mental factor of intention. So it's like a, kind of smaller kind of functional aspect of the mind whereby, we intend to do something. Although that translation is a little bit deceptive, because it doesn't mean like we deliberately intend. It can also be kind of almost an involuntary, automatic intention to do something. But basically, any action, I don't know. I used to think it's any volitional action, any deliberate action. But actually, I think it's more subtle than that. It's even some actions of body, speech, or mind that maybe are even not like expressly deliberate or intentional. But how do we, one person's karma versus another? Basically, it's the idea that, because you, as an individual, you do actions that other individuals don't. You do those actions in dependence upon a whole set of causes and conditions. Maybe you were taught something by your parents, or maybe your friend suggested something, or you had an idea from, something you saw or whatever to do that. But still, it's in the end, it's your action as an individual. It's not something like I do something, you didn't do it necessarily. You do something, I didn't do it. You, as an individual, we do actions with our body, with our speech, with our mind. And so as an individual, we experience the results of those actions, depending upon whether they're motivated by a virtuous intention or non-virtuous intention or neutral intention. It's like, as an individual, we engage in actions that others don't. It's not totally unrelated to individuals, but in the end, we did the action. And so as an individual, we experience the results of that action, whether it's this life or future lives. I think that's where it's different. It's interconnected, but still there's room for individual experience. Right? Yeah. Yes.
I have a follow-up question about tantric teachings. So then I heard again that, for example, sadhanas, they've been created by Tibetans. So it's a past people would just, yogis would just meditate, and then later on Tibetans ended up formed sadhanas or practice. So
no, that's not true. I don't know. There's sadhanas written by Indian yogis, Nagarjuna, and Yeah, Nalanda masters, they wrote sadhanas. They're not, but generally, like the reason we don't use, I mean, most sadhanas, they're composed by Tibetans is because, generation to generation, they made things easier for us, right? So in the past, you look at, commentaries, or maybe also like Vicky was saying, because in the past, maybe they weren't written and they weren't so widely available. Like from generation to generation, they become more and more things that were just oral lineages passed down before from, one master to another and not given out easily, then become like written down and taught and made kind of more easy to follow. So, no, but definitely there were sadhanas before. Yeah. I don't know where. I never heard anything like that. The Tibetans wrote sadhanas. I'm quite sure that's not the case. Why don't we dedicate? We just have 5 minutes left. Maybe we won't do now. I kept thinking, like, what do I want to do today still before we start? The other thing I actually wanted to do was, maybe we'll do tomorrow morning when we start, but is to do like a meditation on, because it's so important to see this connection between looking at, instances of when we have afflictive emotions arise, like attachment, longing, attachment, craving for something, or anger, real aversion for something else, and to see how those are related to a sense of self, a sense of I. Because it's really important, as people considering the Buddhist teachings, to check whether it's really true that these afflictive emotions, basically all the afflictive emotions are either flavors of attachment or aversion. Because attachment is attraction to things that appear desirable to us, and aversion, anger is like aversion towards things that appeal as undesirable to us. So all the other, whether it's arrogance or afflictive doubt or hatred, vengeance, they're all kind of flavors of one of those. And those both, the Buddha said, those both arise from this grasping at a concrete sense of self. So it's important to do, we'll do tomorrow morning, kind of meditation, but maybe if you like, you can also check tonight too. The technique though is just to think of, an experience where you clearly had some afflictive emotion arising, and then see what was the sense of self that you had within that. Was it, how was it? Was it more solid and kind of exclusive to yourself, or was it kind of open and you had a sense of your interconnectedness with others? I think you can see where it's going, but yeah. Let's read some prayers in the prayer book. Let's do that. Let's open up the prayer book, FPMG. Prayers before the teachings again, and there's some dedications at the end somewhere. Now look at the table of contents. Let's see.
19.
Additional prayers. No, 23. Extensive dedication prayers. We'll just do a few. But page 23 in that prayer book. Page 23. Okay. Actually, page 19. Yeah, where it says, prayers for the conclusion of teachings. That fits the moment, right? Okay. So think of all the merit we've created, and we can rejoice first. We started today with a virtuous motivation, started the session with a virtuous motivation. And then whatever merit, effort we've made to understand something about ourselves, something about others, something about the path to awakening and realization. We can rejoice in all of that for ourselves, rejoice in the effort of others. Rejoice in all the merit created by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Shakyamuni Buddha, and others, our own teachers. So all that merit gathered together, Then basically we can dedicate that, may ourselves and all other sentient beings have every form of well-being and happiness up to full enlightenment. And be free from every form of suffering, pain, and dissatisfaction. And then especially very manifest problems like hunger. All those who are hungry, may they be fed. All those who are thirsty, may they have drink. All those who are lonely, may they have companionship. All those who are sick and ill, may they be healed. All those who are suffering from poverty, may they have abundance, higher standard of living. And especially the wars in different places in the world now. The war in Ukraine, Yemen, Somalia, other places. And everywhere there's violence, may that quickly come to an end. May beings' minds be transformed into loving respect, loving kindness and mutual respect for one another. And then the whole problem of climate destruction and global warming, essentially due to greed and ignorance of interdependence, interdependence of humans with the environment they live in. Then may solutions to that be found, and may this whole culture of greed be reversed, and may we live in a sustainable way on the planet Earth. And then may all spiritual teachings which benefit beings flourish. And then we can read some prayers here. So may whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and may it especially cause the essence of perfect, pure Losam Dharma's teachings to shine forever. And we'll skip the mandala offerings and go to page 23 to actualize bodhicitta. May the precious supreme bodhicitta not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline but increase more and more. And then let's skip to the next verse. To realize emptiness. May the precious view of emptiness not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline but increase more and more. Samsara and nirvana lack even an atom of inherent existence, and cause and effect and dependent arising are unbetrayed. I seek your blessings to discern the meaning of Nagarjuna's thought, that these two are mutually complementary and not contradictory. May the precious realization of the two stages not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. And then for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Legtsok, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. Long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savior of the land of snow's teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder Tenzin Legtsok I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then let's skip the next one and the next one. We'll go to the page 26. To meet a perfect guru in all lifetimes. We'll end with that one. In all my lives, never separated from perfect gurus, may I enjoy the magnificent Dharma, and by completing the qualities of the grounds and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradharma. Okay. Then add any other prayers you'd like to make in your own mind. Just bring to mind. So may all your virtuous prayers also be fulfilled in accordance with your wish. Okay, then see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.